Positionality is really just like um how you perceive and interact with the world around you based on the identities that have shaped you. So, what's your position in the world? And this changes in the context that you're in. Okay, I keep saying that, but like just because I'm a queer Filipino woman now doesn't mean my positionality will stay the same because it changes based on who I am interacting with at the moment. So, for example, that can look like talking to people with more privilege. How might I present myself in this space, knowing that this could be the power dynamics in this conversation? Jen, in a different context, so let's say I'm talking to people who are less privileged than me, then my interaction with them also changes. So for me, I think that's what's really powerful about intersectionality is giving you the lenses to look at the world and understand how complex your privileges and oppressions that you have. And it changes a lot based on your not just identity, but how you participate in the world.
You're listening to Drawing on Hope, where we talk to inspiring people who'll paint for us their vision of a better world. I'm Albert Orr, co-founder of Pushpin, a social impact creative agency that uses drawings and stories to help make things make sense. Today, we invited Genica Bucao, who's on a mission to co-create communities of care so we can count on each other amidst conflict, crisis, complexity, complicity, and collapse. Currently, she's doing this by co-leading the process of designing a rapid response ecosystem within the Philippine network of forging intersectional feminist futures. Throughout the next hour, we dive into the complexities of intersectional feminism and what that term means in general and how it applies to the Philippines in particular. We also explore the notions of privilege, responsibility, and community care and how they shape our relationships and interactions with others. It's a lot to unpack, so let's get started.
Because the status quo right now is the systems, infrastructure, the processes, the culture, it's designed to benefit people with privilege as opposed to supporting those who are marginalized. So that's why there's an intent of forging futures. Like, what could a better future look like if it were intersectional and feminist? And in this sense, um, an intersectional feminist future would address multiple, challenges, not just one-dimensional challenges, and involved the voices of those who are marginalized. So that's how forging intersectional feminist futures came to be. But yeah, full disclosure, I wasn't part of the group who conceptualized the project, but I eventually became part of it when they wanted to implement it already in the Philippines because it started as a regional collaboration in Asia. So that's usually how I explain to people what FIFF or FIFF is. It's a regional convening of different organizations in Asia who would want to address gender inequality through intersectional movement building.
There's so much rich narrative that's embedded in the name of FIFF that I'm really drawn to, whether it's that verb, forging, um, you're really like, I'm shaping this, I'm hammering this, diba? I'm exposing it to heat, uh, or even the acknowledgement of how wide ranging and complex gender work really is. Because you're not just forging feminist futures, it's intersectional feminist
Yeah.
futures and really looking at it from a systems perspective. Where does the forging work start and where does it end? Like, how do you then define the scope of, yes, this is a battle we need to be involved in. We need to make our voices heard here. This one, we'll leave it to someone else. Like, how do you then define and pick and choose where you need to be at?
That's a very good question because intersectional nga, 'di ba? And I think some of the worries people have about applying intersectionality is they feel like they have to say yes to everything. One of the factors that determines what we forge towards or what we say yes to is the composition of the network. So when we first started, I reached out to like several organizations working on different rights. I remember there was a pipeline of 190, if I'm not mistaken, organizations. And that kind of just organically narrowed down, like not
Yeah,
because we said no to people, but just some
yeah.
people didn't respond to us, some people didn't say yes. Um, that was one of,
Natural attrition.
yeah. Parang at first, actually, I thought one of the challenges would be like, oh, managing a big network because I assumed and I looked at the world through rose-colored glasses. Now, oh, everyone's gonna wanna be intersectional, rainbows and butterflies. But um, in that process of reaching out to people and telling them that these groups are involved in this network, some of them said no. Because I guess that's the part about yung forging and exposing it to heat that's challenging is um, when you try to bring together different groups and from their perspective they feel like they have or they perceive that they have conflicting issues. That's when they feel like they want to say no. So yeah, that's one factor is the organic composition of the network. And then the second factor is really the network decides what they want to say yes and no to, but just because we're still starting, the first phase of FIFF was really strengthening our collective understanding of intersectionality. Like, what does it mean in the Philippine context, beyond the mainstream discussion of intersectionality, mostly led in the West and by Kimberly Crenshaw, which we appreciate and we learn from that. But what does it look like when we apply it in the Philippines? Um, so yeah, that was the first phase. So we didn't have to say no to particular issues because it was really just building their capacity on understanding intersectionality. How do you analyze uh, cases using intersectionality? How do you plan for it in your organization? How do you operationalize it? And now that we're in a new phase of the project, what the network eventually said yes to is working towards collective care. Like, how do we foster collective care within our network? Um, Given that, most of us suffer from collective burnout as human rights defenders.
I want to make sure that this also makes sense to people who might be
Uh-oh.
hearing about this. For forging intersectional feminist futures, I guess any one of these words naman we can take the time to really pick apart and define, right?
Mm-mm.
But what does it mean to be intersectional? What does it mean to be feminist?
Mm-mm.
What kind of future are you forging? Where can we start? Should we start with defining what feminism is? What does it mean for your group?
Wait, I'm gonna answer that last question.
So
Yeah.
sige, maybe we start with feminism first. What does that mean for the group?
Well, feminism, like bottom line, is really just advocating for the full economic, political, social, cultural participation, and the promotion of the rights of women. So gender equality is the outcome that feminism hopes to accomplish. because it acknowledges that the current world that we live in now is not, you know, equal for women. Like, if I could give examples, if it helps, wage disparity. Most men earn more than most women, or women globally. Certain jobs are dominated by men as opposed to opening it to the space to women. So that is what feminism is. Now, what is intersectional feminism?
Mhm.
It acknowledges that women have different identities that intersect with their gender and sex. So they are not just women, they are women with disabilities, or indigenous women, or queer women. That intersectionality was brought about, or the discussion of intersectionality was brought about because, at least in the US, when feminism came to be, it was usually in the context of the rights of white women. And so a collective of Black lesbian women, the Combahee River Collective, they criticized that and discussed na, what about Black lesbian women? Yeah, that's the, I guess, if people want to look at it historically, that's how we can discuss how intersectionality came into the mainstream discussion. But in FIFF, we acknowledge that even before the term was coined, we have been practicing intersectionality already, given the cultural diversity of the Philippines.
Okay, so how does intersectionality show up in the Philippine context? Or in the
Mm.
Asian context, maybe rin?
So it's kind of hard to say what does intersectionality look like in the Philippines because of the different contexts we have. I mean, the fact that we are made up of different island groups. Parang that already changes how intersectionality might look like in the Cordillera, or in Marawi, or in Pangasinan.
Why is it important to be aware of these different ways that they show up, or different components that make up their identity?
Because we don't want to encourage a universalist approach to
Mhm.
coming up with interventions, whether that's policy or infrastructure. Because if you propose a universalist approach, you will fall into the trap of proposing interventions that is not relevant to that context. So, for example, it doesn't make sense to propose an intervention. Actually, I'll give a specific example that I heard from someone else. It's not based on my experience, but someone, because of the universalist thinking now, oh, this webinar needs to be accessible, so let's hire sign language interpreters. So
Right.
they hired sign language interpreters, without even finding out if their audience actually is composed of,
Okay.
deaf people. And what
Yeah.
ended up happening was they took away resources of the interpreter from another event that was supposed to be helpful with an actual interpreter.
Right. Okay. I get it. How then? So I see some of why it's important to be mindful of these different aspects, and I'm trying to find the right vocabulary.
Mm-mm.
But I'm trying. I see how it's important to be mindful of these different aspects that make up individuals and populations. How do I reconcile that? And this might just me be it. This might just be me and my upbringing showing up. But
Mm.
how do I reconcile that with the notion I was raised on, which is you can't please everyone? Parang you can't naman please
Mm.
everybody. Eh. So then, how do I
Mm.
balance that?
I get that. I think in the context of, because we, when we advocate for intersectionality, it's usually in the context of policies and
Yeah.
infrastructure interventions that we hope the government would do. So I think in that context, parang hindi I don't think we can't please everyone applies because the government has the responsibility to include everyone. Does that make sense? But for me, the sentiment of not pleasing everyone like applies in, I don't know, businesses or social settings.
Okay. How then do I weigh and balance the needs of the few in the context of being able to serve the many? Right? Because
Hmm.
I also don't want to, and again, this is just me trying to figure out how do I frame this
Hmm.
in my head, right? Is there a danger of me serving the loud and noisy few who might not really represent actual interests versus
Hmm.
those who really need the support and resources? Right? Yung sige, the three people in the back of the room na maingay mareklamo. like, pero, pero they're just on Twitter lang pala nagko-complain. Versus people
Hmm.
who actually represent a minority that has specific needs that need to be
Hmm.
served. I don't know. Am I framing that question properly? Is that even the right question to ask?
I think I understand where you're coming from, but it feels like there's a question behind that question. Like, are you worried that people might weaponize intersectionality? Parang ganun ba yung
Yeah, or misrepresent it and misunderstand what it means to be inclusive, right? And what it means to consider people who are not necessarily part of the majority.
I
So,
think that's why
yeah.
I'm very careful about telling people to always base it on their context. Because if you base it on context, then it will be based on the evidence of or the data that shows how the composition of the people in that context. Because I'm worried that when people say just the few, that's based on what? Sometimes our data is not, it's biased, right? The data that we have is biased. And I think that's why there are also calls from people to have disaggregated data. Because right now, the government is required to give sex disaggregated data. So, born male or born female, it doesn't take into account other data points like disability or gender identity. So, because there's no data, it will seem like there's only a few who would benefit from this intervention. Um, Another point I wanted to make, and you can choose to add or remove this, is um, point on why I keep saying that we should be context specific is when we were presenting our progress in FIFF to uh, the Asian audience. It was in a conference open to anyone, actually, anyone from the world. So there were different people who attended. Um, and someone criticized our approach or our framework that it didn't include caste. Is that how you say it? Caste system in India. Um, and because it's not relevant to our context. It doesn't mean that we don't care about people experiencing case-based discrimination. It's just when we were talking about our progress in the Philippines, it doesn't relate to our context.
Right. It doesn't apply to our specific context.
Yeah, that's why I keep saying that don't when people think about intersectionality, it's not necessarily like saying yes to all of those things. It's about looking at your context. What are the communities involved in my context, and how do I include them more in our
Yeah.
interventions?
So I wanna give you a scenario later to
Mm,
try and maybe apply that context specific idea. But before
okay.
that, just a quick jargon check. What do you mean by aggregated and disaggregated data?
Like when I say disaggregated data, for example, when you fill out forms, sometimes they would ask you what your sex is, male or female. So that's sex disaggregated data. It tells us how many male and female people receive this service. So that's what I mean by sex disaggregated data.
And so we prefer that. We prefer disaggregating data.
Yes, but involving other data points, not just sex.
Okay,
We
okay.
like we prefer like finding out if they have functional disabilities,
Okay.
gender identity, whatever is again
So given the
relevant to.
context, it's picking out not just the data in and of itself, pero connecting those disparate pieces of data to form a richer picture of, for example,
Yes,
people that you're trying to serve. Right.
yes. Let's go Pushpin.
Right. Okay. So that makes a bit more sense. So then if I were to plan a birthday party, what are the, and I want to be inclusive, right? Because I might be excluding, don't read into this. This is not based on true life experiences. Pero like if I have my core high school barkada, but I have these little islands of friendships that I've established throughout my life, I want to be as inclusive as possible. So then how do I practice that context specific awareness of the various intersectionalities
When you
involved
plan
in that?
this birthday
Budget
party.
is no question. Yeah, budget is not an issue, but I just want it to be the most, meaningful gathering for everyone. What are some of the things I
Okay.
should be thinking of?
Well, I mean, ask your friends if they have any food restrictions. Ask your friends if they need particular accommodations with, accessing, I don't know, parking spaces, or how they might go up to the venue, assuming it's up, diba? Whatever, go to the venue. So those little things.
What I'm taking away from that is not is that I shouldn't assume that everyone's gonna be like me and that the things I like
Yeah.
they will also like.
Mm-mm.
That sounds like an inconvenience. So then babalik ako. So I'm gonna go back to the cause, right? Why is it then important to, and this is like the worst possible way to say it, and I recognize my privilege, right? But why is it worth inconveniencing myself over just so I can make space for other people?
Hmm. And you're coming from the perspective of an individual?
I'm coming from the perspective of I'm aware I'm privileged. I mean, I guess I'm coming from the perspective of I'm privileged, right? And even with that simple example that you have, where sige, let's plan a birthday party. If I really want to include everyone, then I'll ask you if you have allergies. So then that means I have to get the caterer and pay them extra to prepare something special for you. I have to make sure that the venue is accessible, right? If you have a wheelchair, I have one friend who's in a wheelchair, then I have to consider that. I can't just suddenly say, let's go and set my birthday in Cancun and assume everyone can afford the plane tickets to go there, right? So, all of these considerations. What I'm getting at is if I'm not part of the, if I don't feel marginalized, if I am in this privileged position, it seems like I have to go through some inconvenience.
Mm.
The sum is relative, right? It could be I could be a little inconvenienced. It could be a lot of inconvenience, but regardless, it feels like it's inviting us to get out of what we perceive to be our comfort zone bubbles to
Mm-hmm.
make room for other people.
Mm-hmm.
Why is
Like,
that
what's your
important?
incentive?
Yeah, I was trying to avoid that question. Like, what's in it for me? Pero what is in it for me? Why is that important for even the people who are in the privileged positions?
Hmm. I think before I answer that, I also just wanna reiterate again, or like kind of separate the role of the government and the individual.
Sure,
So the government is not supposed to be thinking what's in it for me, because again, they are
it's their
mandated.
responsibility. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that's their responsibility.
Yeah, but I get what you mean if you're like an individual. Um, why should I do these things?
And
Well,
hopefully, Jen, like it's not just why should I do these things, diba? Parang it's an entire spectrum of responses, right? If I'm part of the
mm,
privilege, why should I care? Why should I apply this to the next time I plan my birthday party? Um, all the way to how can I be an ally and help give voice to those who don't have it, right? How can I use my position of privilege in order to do more, right? To go
mm-hmm.
beyond party planning. But like yun, I guess going back to that, what's in it for us? Why is this
Mm-hmm.
important?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, yeah, I don't know if the birthday party analogy is helpful, but I want to say that one of the misconceptions about inclusion is this misunderstanding that you have to include everyone all the time. And then people kind of just weaponize that to say, no, oh, you can't do that. It's impossible, etc. That's why for me personally, I prefer to use the definition of like, um, having a shared purpose and bringing different people who have that like shared purpose. But going back to your party plan, um, I feel like number one, convenience has been normalized a lot. Uh, and okay, this is maybe going outside of intersectionality, but for me, something that I've been trying to work towards and learn is that friendships are inconvenient sometimes, and that's okay. So, if you're party planning and you really care about your friends, like it's fine. For me, you have to, like what you said earlier, you have to unlearn and go outside of your typical comfort zone and be okay with the inconvenience of doing these things. Um, it's hard to make a case for like what's in it for me because I just personally feel like we owe each other care. Um, I don't know how to make a business case for that.
Then maybe I can put that question in a different way. But
Hmm.
paint us a picture of what the future could look like. Because it's embedded in the name, right? You're forging this future. But paint us a picture of what that tomorrow would look like or could look like if everyone would think in those ways.
Mm.
What would
I
it look like
think,
if the privileged made space for those who've been deprived of it for the longest time, who've yearned for
mhm,
it? What does it look like if they're given a voice, if they're given an equal share of the pie?
mhm. So I know I've been talking about intersectionality in the context of interventions, principles, policies, etc. But personally, the way that learning about intersectionality has helped me on an individual level is really understanding my positionality. Okay, jargon check. Positionality is really just like how you perceive and interact with the world around you based on the identities that have shaped you. So, what's your position in the world? And this changes in the context that you're in. Okay, I keep saying that, but like just because I'm a queer Filipino woman now doesn't mean my positionality will stay the same because it changes based on who I am interacting with at the moment. So, for example, that can look like talking to people with more privilege. How might I present myself in this space, knowing that this could be the power dynamics in this conversation? Jen, in a different context, so let's say I'm talking to people who are less privileged than me, then my interaction with them also changes. So for me, I think that's what's really powerful about intersectionality is giving you the lenses to look at the world and understand how complex your privileges and oppressions that you have. And it changes a lot based on your not just identity, but how you participate in the world.
What comes to mind on a micro level, and I say this micro because like this is like the least low stake, the most low stakes scenario that came to mind when you were talking about positionality, is how when I talk to my wife, I can talk about whatever I want. When I talk to my parents, my vocabulary goes down to PG 13 because there are certain things I can bring up and talk to. And then when it's with my kids, then it's a certain range of topics as well. But it allows me to, I guess, nurture and care for and preserve the relationship better because I know how to place myself.
How to
Because
position yourself. Mhm.
I'm not saying anything inappropriate, for example.
Yeah.
And I can then proceed from a space of empathy,
Mm-hmm.
and greater connection. And I think in listening to you and listening to how you talk about positionality and how the more mindful you are of people who are not necessarily like you, um, the more you're able to extend that compassion and empathy, and therefore have richer relationships with people in your environment. Because then, rather than, for example, outright dismiss people who don't vote the same people you vote, right? Then maybe I can come from a space of curiosity and empathy and why are you like that? Um,
Mm-hmm.
Rather than a space of judgment or even worse, dismissal. Yung okay, you are deaf, therefore I cannot communicate with you ever, and I'll just
Yeah.
ignore you, right? Um, so I get that on an individual level, and I feel like at least for me, listening to how you talk about positionality and being aware of the people around us, especially those who don't always get to have a voice, um, I think it's a world and it's a community that I'd want to be part of, if that
Mm-hmm.
makes sense.
Other than knowing what to converse on or what not to converse on based on the people you're exposed to. I also use um, my understanding of my positionality to interrogate myself consistently based on the privileges I hold. What are sacrifices that I can and cannot afford?
Okay.
And when you say sacrifice, like what are sources of comfort that you can let go of, or maybe you can't let go of? What are things that I am willing to risk or not willing to risk in support of communities who are harmed because of my privilege, because I benefit from this system? I just remembered your question earlier, like why should I do this? What's in it for me? Going
Yeah.
back to that, I think for me personally, it has always been about responsibility and accountability. Like I don't think I ask myself what's in it for me. It's more because of the privileges I hold and I benefit from these things. What am I responsible for? What am I accountable for?
In listening to your sacrifice, comfort, and risk assessment of yourself, I think we need to briefly touch on the community care work that you're doing, just
Mm.
because it sounds exhausting. And I say that with all the love and empathy and compassion, but I feel like every person has a set limit of empathy and willpower and compassion in any given day. I'm
Yeah,
saying, love is an infinite well, sure, but in action, willpower is limited, right?
yeah.
Energy and time is limited. Caring can be tiring. Um, and I guess in in understanding and being aware of our positions of privilege, I guess that's that's a response that is demanded of you the moment you're aware of it. And the more aware you are, the more that you're compelled to not
Yeah,
just stay within your comfort. Because it's one of those things where once you see it, you can't unsee it.
yeah.
But it also seems to suggest that there's a point of exhaustion. So then, where does community care come in? And can you talk a bit about your efforts there?
I guess I can start with a an analogy that I really like, only because I was a former choir member. So I read somewhere that collective care, like imagine people singing in a choir and you're singing a very prolonged note. And sometimes you have to stop and catch for air. But you trust that someone else from the choir is continuing singing the notes. So after you get that, you know, breath of air, you continue singing and then they can get their share of oxygen also. That's what I like to imagine when I think about collective care. Um, and how that looks like in the context of I guess your responsibility and accountability would be number one, spreading out the responsibility and accountability. Like you're not just one singular person trying to address this problem, but you have a community to consult with if you're faced with a scenario where you're not sure what to do, if this is a responsible or yeah, if it's a responsible way to act on this scenario, you seek out the help of your community. Two, it's, I guess, in the context of our project, uh, when we first started FIFF or FIFF, I was the sole project officer. And when we had the opportunity to continue the project because of a different grant, I was I advocated for there to be two co-leads because for me, I part of fostering collective care in creating a rapid response ecosystem is to share the load and the burden. Um, na hindi ka lang nag-iisang tao na hindi lang sa'yo nakasalalay lahat. Yun. I felt like I needed to say that in Tagalog kasi iba yung impact niya. Mas may ginhawa kapag may kasama ka. Yeah, now I forgot the question. So what did you want to get out of that?
So, community care for you is really just trusting that there will be others who are in the same journey as you and can help you with the load. Um,
Yes, but it's
mhm.
not just, trusting without actually talking about it. For me, it's important that you are clear with your agreements that if this
Okay.
happens, I can seek out your help. Or if this happens, you can seek out my help. So it's a conscious effort to build trust, not just trust.
Blind faith.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
All right, because that's what I was gonna that would have been my follow up question. How much of that is implicit trust versus you have to also work at it so that you know that you're not on your own with this.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm hearing is this is also something that you work towards. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, for me, at the beginning, like you try your best to be, explicit about certain things, but you also agree that there are things that um, you can't predict that will happen, conflicts that will arise. So there's this agreement at the beginning where if conflicts do arise, let's try to work towards each other instead of away. So for me, a necessary skill in building community care would be conflict resolution and not be conflict avoidant because walking towards conflict is an opportunity to repair and build relationship within the community.
So given everything that we've been talking about so far about how it's important to be aware of the different intersectionalities of people that we encounter or maybe even those we don't encounter and precisely that we've maybe overlooked, right? um and calling for, I guess, greater empathy, compassion, awareness, and even a recognition of our own privileges and
Mm.
positionality. um how do we move that forward? What can we do to help forge that intersectional feminist future that you're working towards?
Other than, like we mentioned, be aware of your positionality and use that information to calibrate or adjust how you're interacting with the world around you. That's the second. A third is use the same information again to interrogate yourself, like what you can do within your power and privilege, what you can sacrifice, risk, and let go of. So those are the top three things. And I guess just to continue forging towards intersectional feminist futures.
How can we support the work How else can we support the work of FIFF or learn more about it?
If you want to learn more about what we've done so far, we have uh, our research on collective care that is available on issue.com. We can add that as a link, I suppose. Um, and then if you want to support forging intersectional feminist futures, we're very open to donations as well. So that will definitely help us build a mutual aid mechanism that we're working towards as part of the rapid response ecosystem. Um, and also have a couple of other proceedings published under the UP Center for Integrative and Development Studies. If you want to know our ways of working, like what have we been doing to practice intersectionality within our network, those are available also.
So one of the things that we do as part of our, uh, I guess, especially as we're winding down, one of the things that we do on the show is we ask a series of rapid fire questions. So we'll be asking these questions, and we'll get through it as quickly as we can. Kaya mo yan.
Okay.
So I'll start with an easy one. Like, what's one tool or app that you can't live without?
Oh, brain.fm.
Ooh. Um, is
Kailangan ko
there
ba
a
explain?
you don't no judgment? I mean, do you feel the need to justify it?
Ay, hindi naman. More like, baka hindi lang alam ng mga tao.
Sige, tell us briefly about what brain.fm is. Although I use it there. Go.
Okay, you know it. So I struggle with executive function. It's hard for me to focus. So I use brain.fm to force me to focus and work for 25 minutes. And it also gives me a verbal reminder to take a 5-minute break. It's like a you can use it as a guided Pomodoro with science-backed music.
I love it.
Naging ad pala.
For what it's worth, that's also why I'm familiar with it. I use it to
Yeah.
time my tasks. All right. What's because we talked about community care. Let's go to self care. Do you have a go to self care activity, especially when work gets tough?
I meditate. That sounds like bull, maybe for some people, but it's true. It's true.
Do you have a book, movie, or podcast that has deeply inspired you?
Pwede bang hindi none of those?
What else could it be?
No,
Go.
because I was trying to answer this before our call, and it was hard to answer because really what like inspires me, even though this sounds like a Miss Universe answer, but really what has inspired me is working with the FIFF network.
Do you have one thing that you wish more people understood about your cause?
Mm. That people go beyond the discussion of intersecting identities because it's often used as a way to weaponize and participate in the harmful practice of oppression Olympics. Like, I hope people understand that intersectionality really is for us to understand how the different systems intersect. Um, and it's really more for us to understand our positionality.
Do you have a mantra or a daily affirmation that you use, especially in the context of the work that you do?
Hmm. One step at a time.
All right, so last question. And maybe this might be reiterating some of the things that we've been talking about anyway, but like, what do you want audiences to take away from this?
Okay. If there's one thing I hope people take away from discussing intersectionality is that You can use it on an individual level to understand the privileges and oppressions that you hold, to become a better human in terms of interacting with the world around you, and understand what are things that you can risk, let go of, and sacrifice.
Right. And finally, how can listeners stay connected to you and your work?
Um, you can email us at fiff.project@gmail.com. We are fortunately, unfortunately, not really present in social media, as we are focusing on building internal relationship building.
So the keyword is
So,
yet. We're not on social media yet.
yes. So, if you want to reach out to us, just email us.
All right. Thank you so much, Jen, for your time with us. We enjoyed the conversation. Salamat.
Thank you.
Drawing on Hope is a podcast by Pushpin, a social impact design agency that uses drawings and stories to help make things make sense. Follow us at Pushpin Visuals on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, or visit www.pushpinvisuals.com. Thanks for listening, and remember, hope isn't something we wait for, it's something we create.